Hey Michigan fans, Keith here from Lewis Jewelers, and we are super excited to be able to cheer on all the student athletes that will be on the field and the courts this season. But just like Michigan sports, special moments have not been canceled. Come into Lewis Jewelers or visit lewisjewelers.com so our team can help you celebrate birthdays, anniversaries, or your just because moments. Go Blue!
Lewis Jewelers, celebrate the moments.
Welcome to the Wolverine.com podcast. This is the Maize and Blue Breakdown. I am Clayton Sayfie with Austin Fox. Check us out at thewolverine.com. If you are not a subscriber already, we have a great deal for you. Use the promo code Nike75 when you sign up right now. You get a free $75 Nike gift card for signing up for an annual subscription. That's all of our premium content, insider content, behind-the-scenes looks at Michigan football, basketball, and recruiting. So check us out at thewolverine.com. Use the promo code Nike75. And Austin, you pay $75, you get $75 in Nike gear or, basically Nike bucks right back to you. So, I asked you last week, 75 minus 75, 0. So it's basically free. So everybody should go and do that right now. It is the last day we're running this promotion. So Thursday, if you're listening on Friday, I think you missed it. Double check that at thewolverine.com if it's been extended, but I'm pretty sure you missed out. So everybody on Thursday, go and do that. Anyway, obviously a huge week of news, not necessarily having to do with on-the-field stuff with Michigan football. They are coming off of a 27-17 loss to previously 0-5 Penn State. But the storylines have quickly changed to Michigan pausing in-person activities on Monday, doing the same thing on Tuesday, and then eventually on Wednesday, canceling the game with Maryland due to an increased number of positive COVID-19 tests within the program. Disappointing, definitely, and it puts the Ohio State game now in jeopardy for next week. Doing a little research, 4 teams have canceled games. 4 teams have been the reason for canceled games, and 3 out of those 4 have missed 2 straight games. Ohio State's the only one that hasn't yet, but that still remains to be seen as they canceled last week's game against Illinois and will take on Michigan State this weekend here. So we'll see what happens. They return to the building this week, so they might be the only team to come back. It might be a little bit out of necessity because they need to get in a couple more games to get into the Big Ten championship and possibly the playoffs. So basically, game against Maryland canceled, game against Ohio State, based on the trends that have gone on throughout the Big Ten, is in doubt and probably unlikely to be played based on those trends. But obviously, this is a weird year, and every situation is different, and you hope Michigan can get it under control. But Austin Fox, this is Michigan's done a great job throughout the season, throughout the offseason. But finally, basically, I think Chris Ballas, our colleague, has said it numerous times. You can do everything right with this virus, but it comes to bite you at one time or another.
Yeah, we kind of saw the writing on the wall leading up to this one earlier in the week when Michigan announced on Monday that they were doing everything virtually, and then that carried over, and then finally, obviously, they didn't practice on Wednesday, and that's when the final announcement came. So, again, we kind of saw this one before it happened, so once the announcement came, it wasn't really a surprise. And as for the Ohio State game next week, I don't think that game's going to happen either at this point on December 4th or whatever today is. I would be very, very surprised if Michigan plays Ohio State or another game for that matter. I think this 2020 season might be done and in the books, and Chris Ballas shared a similar thought when they announced the cancellation of the Maryland game, so I wouldn't be surprised if that 9th game doesn't get played on December 19th, and then with the way bowl games are now being canceled as well, I do not expect Michigan to play in a bowl game. So I think this 2020 season is in the books. Obviously, we could still see this Michigan team play another game, but if I had to put money on it as of right now, I would say that no more games happen. And you and I were discussing this before the podcast. You really, really want to see this team play again, see more Michigan football, and I totally get that. Unfortunately, I am in the opposite boat. I am very glad that this team is not going to be playing this Saturday because they've been an embarrassment this year, and it pains me to see that. But watching this team struggle and underperform and go through every Saturday with a dull and lifeless attitude has taken its toll on me. And there are not many things more important to me in life than Michigan football. Faith, family, and friends are three of the few, but watching this team struggle is something that I don't care to do again. Even in 2008 and 2014, when Michigan struggled the horrible years, 3-9 in 08 and 5-7 in 2014, I still looked forward to watching that team every Saturday, even though they obviously weren't good. But something's just different this year, man, and I don't get the same joy out of watching this team, and it's due to the way they've struggled. So if this 2020 season is indeed over, I am completely fine with that. And it's time to turn the page and forget this disastrous season ever happened.
I live by like a personal policy I have is more football is greater than less football, and more Michigan football is greater than less Michigan football. Do you think this season was worth it then to get played based on what you've seen on the field?
That's such a tough question to answer. Maybe. I mean, obviously, a lot of players gained a valuable experience this year, even though the season was a disaster, but so few positives came out of it. If Michigan would not have played this year and then gone into next year, not having played here in 2020, I think that it would have taken a toll as well. So that's a very hard question to answer when we don't know what all went on behind the scenes, but perhaps we just would have delayed the inevitable then. Would 2021 have basically been a disastrous season and kind of delayed, what we saw here in 2020? So I'll say yes, it was worth it, but that's a hard question to answer. And the main reason I say yes is because of the valuable experience that a lot of newcomers got on the field, and hopefully for the fact that the coaches saw a lot of the problems that they have from a coaching standpoint, and hopefully they can get those fixed heading into next year.
Yeah, I think it was 1,000% worth it. You didn't know you were going to have all the injuries you were going to have. You didn't know some guys wouldn't opt back in. So many things have happened, and negative results on the field. In my opinion, any result on the field is better than just giving up and basically not playing a season if you're the Big Ten. So I'm glad this season has gotten off. I mean, we've seen some good college football. We've seen some games get canceled, but we kind of knew that was going to happen, and the season's really gone fairly smoothly in my mind, knowing that you cancel a game, you handle your outbreaks within some of these programs, and you move on, and every team's gotten back on the field. Nobody's had to cancel their seasons yet. I would disagree on the fact that I don't think we've seen the last of this Michigan team on the field. It would be one of the worst outbreaks in college football if they don't get this thing under control before the Champions Week game. I don't think any team has missed 3 straight. I'm not 1,000% sure on that. I know for a fact no Big Ten team has. And obviously that's a little more relevant because Michigan's under those protocols with every other Big Ten team. It would be one of the worst outbreaks in college football. And, based on, I guess, the evidence we have that Michigan hasn't hit the Big Ten's threshold yet, because they said they can return to practice Monday at the earliest, which means they didn't hit that red protocol that would force a 7-day shutdown. Maybe they'll get there. Maybe the spread's continuing to happen, but I think we're going to see this Michigan football team on the field. I think there's a decent chance. I mean, I wouldn't go over 50%, like I mentioned earlier, that they play Ohio State. I certainly hope they do and they can get this thing under control and everybody's all right, but I think they'll definitely be good to go by December 19th. But it's 2020. Who the hell knows anything, basically? So you could be right. Let's quickly talk about your boy KIRK Herbstreit. We were talking before the show, and we have differing viewpoints on this. And it's been talked about ad nauseum really throughout the week, and I think that's one of your gripes with the whole thing. So we can get into it quickly. But KIRK Herbstreit basically insinuating that Michigan would wave the white flag against Ohio State next week with or without COVID outbreaks. That basically Michigan would opt out just to not play or not lose another game, which is asinine, crazy, dangerous, I would say. I saw Angelique Shangelis tweet that it was irresponsible. I think that's a good word for it because it's basically saying and trying to put pressure on the University of Michigan to, whether or not they have COVID outbreaks, get that game in no matter what. Otherwise, they're going to have egg on their face because KIRK Herbstreit's saying they're waving the white flag. I think irresponsible is a great way to describe it, but it's also, I think, factually wrong. There's been no evidence, and he even, in his apology later on Twitter said that he has no evidence, but there's been no evidence that Michigan would ever do anything like that. And in fact, he was talking about how unfair it is that a team could opt out of a game, just citing COVID as a reason. When Ohio State did it last week against Illinois, they didn't hit the Big Ten threshold, yet they canceled their game against Illinois out of caution. So I think just on a number of levels, it was a ridiculous statement, and to go on national television and kind of throw out your Ohio State conspiracies. And I've always thought he's been a super biased broadcaster when it comes to Ohio State, when it comes to Michigan, and, showing his true colors, I guess, once again on the national stage.
Yeah, so I think you and I are in complete disagreement on this one. I think I'm in the more minority, in regards to most of the Michigan fan base, but I honestly couldn't care less about this. I think it's been blown way out of proportion. KIRK Herbstreit is just one dude with an opinion. Who cares what he thinks? I don't understand the reaction that people are giving around the country and why this has become such a big story. I basically saw it, thought nothing of it, and brushed it off. Again, he's one guy with an opinion. Sure, he said it on national TV, and that's obviously why it's taken off. Dan Patrick commented. Other national college football analysts have commented. Was it a little stupid? Sure, but I don't know why people are so offended and so worked up about it. I think people are way too sensitive nowadays, and I think that kind of goes hand in hand with this. I think people need to be more thick-skinned. Again, I completely brushed it off. It's not a big deal. It's not a story at all, in my opinion. I think that him apologizing, even though it was probably forced and he was told to do so, should have been the end of it. But people keep dragging this thing out and blowing it out of proportion like the media loves to do nowadays.
Two things. I agree. He's just one man with an opinion. And like I said, I don't, not a KIRK Herbstreit fan. I don't think he's, one of the best out there or anything like that. But he kind of stated it as fact. So it's like he's one man with an opinion, but he kind of stated it as almost a report. And I guess he did clarify later and apologize. He kind of just apologized, saying that he should have never said it. And it was kind of a half-hearted apology in my mind. But then basically the other thing is, it was an accusation almost. And I think he was kind of floating it out there probably to try to protect Ohio State. And it's kind of that time of year when KIRK Herbstreit goes on those shows and starts lobbying for the Buckeyes to make the college football playoff, despite the, a loss to Iowa or a loss to Purdue or whatever. He starts to kind of nitpick and get his narrative out there. So don't you think in a way that it was a little more than just an opinion? It was a little more accusation and almost a report than, him just kind of doing that. And it's kind of, I think Angelique's right. The word irresponsible is perfect for it, because it's a conspiracy theory that he threw out there. And I think it's kind of dangerous.
Yeah. If he stated it as a report, like you're basically saying he did, then I think irresponsible is a good word for that. And that was stupid of him to do so. But what he should have done is then clarified, basically saying that that's his opinion and that's not a factual, statement, which is obviously not the case. And then I think that should have ended it. Why it's being dragged out is what I don't understand, and why people are bashing him as hard as they are, saying they hope, bad things happen to him and stuff like that. I've seen some people say stuff like that about him. That's where I'm coming from when I say it's being blown out of proportion. So irresponsible is a good word for it if he stated it as a fact, but he should have clarified, and that should have been the end of it.
All right. We got jobs to do and talk about it. So I guess, we're kind of fueling the fire, but again, we get paid to do it here on this podcast. So here we go. And then Warde Manuel, the last thing on this KIRK Herbstreit thing. And by the way, actually, check out the Wolverine.com and check out Doug Skeen's comments on this whole thing. It was really well done. John Borton wrote a great column with quotes from former Michigan All-Big Ten offensive lineman and one of our analysts, Doug Skeen. So check that out. But this is Warde Manuel, his comments here on the KIRK Herbstreit thing when he was talking to MGO Blue TV Wednesday evening when he was basically explaining the decision to cancel. He says, "I think it's ridiculous. I have to pause because of my words. I was angered, infuriated by the insinuation that Michigan would do anything other than to play a football game. We've been playing this game since 1879. We're the winningest program for a reason, because we play whoever's in front of us. The only way we want to keep anybody from moving on is to beat them on the fields of play. To insinuate that, to say something other than that is a statement by a fool. It is a statement that is, I can't tell you how embarrassed I am for the Big Ten Conference to have one of their representatives who played this game to say that about any team in this conference and to say it about a college football and student athletes around this country who are trying to play games during a pandemic. It's ridiculous and sad. I think it was good for Warde Manuel to do that. It can kind of become a rallying cry. And if Michigan does play next week, you put that chip on your shoulder. We saw there was a picture that surfaced. It's not confirmed that it's true, but basically the rumor that Ryan Day said that he was going to hang 100 on Michigan. Then there was a graphic that was up in the Michigan weight room on the big TV screen that they have up there of Ryan Day's quote. And that kind of surfaced or whatever on Twitter, and that could be Photoshop. It could be not Photoshop. It looked real. Anyway, seems like they kind of wanted to take that to heart. Obviously, the season hasn't gone the way they wanted it to. I would imagine that Kirk Herbstreit's quotes are going to be up there, and waving the white flag quote is going to be up there, and you take it to heart. And if that doesn't piss you off, Austin, you have to admit this, whether or not you agree. And I respect your viewpoint on it, and I think you're not the only one that shares that viewpoint, but it has to piss you off if you're in that Michigan building, if you're in Schembechler Hall. Get behind that, use that chip on your shoulder, and take your shot. I know it's going to be, obviously, tiny, tiny chance Michigan beats Ohio State, but you take your shot, right?
Yeah, there's no question about it. Anyone who thinks that any Michigan coach on that staff or any player in the locker room, the ones who are all in for Michigan anyway, which isn't the case with everybody, thinks that Michigan doesn't want to play Ohio State this year is absolutely crazy. There's nothing more than they would like to go out there in Columbus and ruin Ohio State's season. You look at guys like Aiden Hutchinson, even though he's injured right now, Kwity Paye, Carlo Kemp, the guys who are all in for Michigan, Ben Mason, the captains on this team. There's nothing more that they would like than to end their careers on a high note, go out and beat Ohio State and the coaching staff as well, for that matter. They're not afraid or intimidated by Ohio State. Heck, Indiana almost beat Ohio State, so it's not like this is some invincible team. So anybody who thinks that they don't want to play this game is absolutely crazy.
No matter how bad the season's gone, you can be a legend next week. If Michigan plays Ohio State, there are numerous guys that could become Michigan legends. I said it in 2017 before the John O'Korn game that I said, hey, John O'Korn's been bad this year. He's been really bad. It's unfortunate that he had to start for Michigan in that game, but you never know what can happen. He can become a legend. They almost won that game with really no help from him, and no offense to him, I guess. With all due respect to John O'Korn, he's a good kid, a good person. But basically, and even that last drive he had, it was like become a legend. So your thoughts on that, I guess. I mean, you kind of mentioned those guys in that building, they want nothing more. And, man, you make a couple plays, it's going to take more than that. But if you do that and if you somehow come out with a win, there's still stuff to play for in this game. And I think that's what makes this rivalry so good.
Exactly. I couldn't agree with you more on that one. You can etch your name in the Michigan history record books if you were to play that game next week and win it. We've seen lesser teams do that countless times throughout history to Ohio State. John O'Korn in 2017 is the perfect example. If they would have won that game, they trailed by 4 and had the ball with only 3 minutes left. And again, if O'Korn would have led a game-winning drive, he would have gone down in the history books. Tim Biakabatuka in 1995 on what was a lesser Michigan team tore up Ohio State for 313 yards and is a Michigan legend because of it. Brian Greasy hitting Ty Streets in 1996 in Columbus on what was also a lesser Michigan team against an undefeated and number 2 ranked Ohio State team. Those two became Michigan legends in large part because of that play. So we've seen it countless times throughout history, and I'm sure every guy who is in the Michigan locker room this year who is all in for Michigan is thinking that exact same thing and thinking that they could also etch their name into the Michigan record books if they were to play that game next week and ruin Ohio State's season.
I tweeted this yesterday after the cancellation, but it's kind of sort of Ohio State week. I mean, you don't know if the game's going to get played, but at least in Schembechler Hall, they knew the writing was on the wall Wednesday morning, but that page, I'm sure, was turned pretty quickly over to Ohio State. You dust off the Ohio State binder, hopefully not too much dust on it because you're working on it throughout the year, but it's Ohio State week within Schembechler Hall, and whether that's Schembechler Hall virtual, whatever, through Zoom and at the home offices if you're Jim Harbaugh and his staff and the players if you're in your dorm or apartment. But it's Ohio State week. You get a little extra preparation. It's not necessarily, it doesn't guarantee anything by any means. And you get a little chip on your shoulder. You get a little bulletin board material from KIRK Herbstreit. They're going to need a hell of a lot more than that, but it's a decent start, I guess. And you hope everybody's okay, and you hope that they can get this thing going. We haven't heard of any serious medical issues as of yet, so that is absolutely fantastic to hear. But it's Ohio State week, Austin. Basically, kind of, sort of. We'll see if the game gets played.
Yeah, there's no question about it. It should be Ohio State week in some capacity, 365 days out of the year for these Michigan players and coaches, but it truly kicks into full gear the second that game ends, the previous Saturday, the Ohio State game. But unfortunately, that wasn't quite the case against Penn State last Saturday because you thought you were playing Maryland next. But the second that Maryland game was announced, it was canceled. You 100% flipped the page to Ohio State week. I'll never forget the Brady Hoke era, each week of the Michigan-Ohio State game, because he actually did an excellent job of preparing his teams for that game every year. His lesser Michigan teams in both 2013 and 2014 had excellent game plans and somehow competed with powerhouse Ohio State teams and nearly pulled off the upset. Of course, they were a 2-point conversion away in 2013, and they were leading in Columbus in the second half in 2014 in what was a 5-7 Michigan team and an Ohio State team that wound up winning the national title. So if you put in the appropriate preparation and effort and you bring the intensity in that game, that's when you can say throw the records out the window, because we've seen it countless times in the past. It's not always about talent and the Jimmies and the Joes, if you will, but instead the mindset that you bring into that game. And unfortunately, ever since Brady Hoke left, I think that Ohio State mindset and they've been more focused. So that's something that needs to be fixed, and I really hope that Jim Harbaugh and his team figure that out this year if that game gets played next week.
Yeah, in 2016 they should have won that game. In 2017, I think Michigan really came out with a valiant effort, but wasn't able to finish the deal. But they certainly need to get better in that respect. One of my favorite things about turning the page to Ohio State week is when you're at a Michigan basketball game the week before, and I was at the Chattanooga Michigan game a couple years ago, Friday, right after Thanksgiving, day before Michigan Ohio State, and Michigan's blowing out Chattanooga. The crowd starts chanting "Beat Ohio." It's too bad we don't get that at Chrysler this year, and we would get that on Sunday. We'd probably get that on Wednesday of next week if fans were allowed in. But let's shift our focus to Michigan basketball, who is 3-0 now. They had a little bit of a scare, Austin. I mean, some people say it was a scare, I guess. Never in doubt to me, the overtime game against Oakland. Of course, I'm just kidding. But that was a really bad first half performance on offense, 15 turnovers, but they were able to get out of it. And you were able to find a star in Hunter Dickinson, who had 19 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, all coming in the second half or overtime. Michigan wins that game by 10 points. Terrence Williams, his AAU teammate from Team Takeover, a huge boost as well, and those two really looked like they were on the same page. But basically, Michigan 3-0 after beating Ball State last night, Wednesday night, and they look okay. It looks like there's certainly some things to clean up, but this team is well on their way to being, I think, at least a top half of the Big Ten team and possibly a Big Ten contender, considering, Isaiah Livers has looked really strong. And is quietly kind of being, becoming the star on that team. 20 points per game in the first 3. Franz Wagner has a little bit of a better game last night after, being pretty quiet offensively in the first 2.
We heard from someone inside the Michigan building, a very good source after that Oakland game, that he admitted Michigan thought they were going to roll over Oakland, and perhaps they didn't bring in the appropriate energy into that game, and it showed because Oakland nearly pulled that one off. And the Michigan players admitted after last night's win that they were not going to let that happen again. And that really played out on the court against Ball State. Michigan jumped out to leads of 25-11 and 34-14. So they came out on fire and focused. Granted, Ball State went on a 19-6 run late in that first half to cut it to 7 at halftime, but it was good to see Michigan come out with their foot on the gas once again in that second half and really pull away early and put that game out of reach. 4 different guys scored in double figures last night, and we're really seeing the balance on this Michigan team. Isaiah Livers had 21 and has now had 20-point games, or back-to-back 20-point games for the first time in his entire career. You mentioned Hunter Dickinson and the star he's turning into, a double-double last night in just his 3rd career collegiate game, 12 points and 11 boards. It's clear he's better than Austin Davis, so I really like the makeup of this Michigan team. Afterward, in the post-game press conference, there was a reporter, I'm not going to mention his name, but I'm pretty darn sure he's an Ohio State guy, and he asked every player and Juwan Howard if they were pretty disappointed in that win, seeing as how they let Ball State trim that big lead and cut it to only 7.5, and each player and Juwan Howard were like, no, this was pretty darn impressive because it's very early in the season and we're still working on a lot of things. And I think people need to remember that, man. You see so many growing pains in these early season wins. So if you beat a team by 15 or 20 or 25 early in the year, regardless of who it is, that's a pretty darn good win. Look at some of the powerhouses who have struggled around the nation in recent years. We saw Duke lose at home to Stephen F. Austin last year. We saw Kentucky lose at Rupp to Evansville last year. We saw Kentucky go down to Richmond at home last Sunday. And obviously those are some of the blue bloods in the sport. So people need to remember it happens. You're going to struggle in games early in the year. And again, if you pull out a 15 or 20-point win, that's a pretty darn good victory. And that's exactly what Michigan did last night.
The best wins are when you win by 1 or more points. So you'll take it. Yeah, I thought those questions were kind of weird too. And I guess I didn't know who the guy was, but if he's an Ohio State guy, then more power to him. He's doing his,
Yeah. What do you expect? The Chris Ballard had a pretty funny joke after the game talking about this guy. The guy was not at the game, but he was asking the questions virtually from his home, and Ballas was kind of making fun of him and said, basically imitating the guy, saying, how does it feel that you only covered the spread by 6 points instead of 7 or something like that? So they were just absurd questions, and obviously Michigan took care of business and it was thrilled with a win.
Yep, no doubt. Going forward, and you kind of already mentioned a couple of these things, but Michigan's got a couple tougher games. They played 2 MAC teams and a Horizon League team. UCF on Sunday, NC State on Wednesday in the Big Ten ACC Challenge, and then you get into Big Ten play with Penn State on December 13th. Get a little break, you play on Christmas, and on, and you're on to the Big Ten slate. There's a couple things I want to see out of this Michigan team. Number one, put Hunter Dickinson in the starting lineup immediately. It's going to get to a point where you can't afford not to start him. He's clearly the best guy down low. Austin Davis has always been a guy that can give you 10, 15 good, solid minutes off the bench, but he's not the guy down low for you. I like Brandon Johns down there as a small ball 5. I like Brandon Johns in there in the game a lot, and I thought the rotations were weird, and that's my next thing that I want to see. Tighten up the rotation a little bit, and Juwan Howard has talked about how he wants all hands on deck because it's COVID year, and he said to us, COVID rules the other day. Not COVID rules, but COVID rules. Like, I don't even know if I said that, emphasized it right. So basically the rules of COVID, play a bunch of guys because you never know what the heck's going to happen with who's going to be in, who's going to be out. But tighten that rotation up as long as you have everybody there, in my mind. I know it's early. You didn't have the exhibition. You didn't have a normal offseason. So I expect him to do that. I would think he would. But give me Hunter Dickinson in the starting lineup and give me a little bit of a tighter rotation, a little less Terrence Williams. Unless he's playing super well, you can kind of feel that out. But give me a little more Brandon Johns, and I think this team will be pretty good. There's some concerns. One of those would be the perimeter defense. I think they're going to have a tough time against some of the more elite guards in the Big Ten, considering Mike Smith and Eli Brooks aren't world beaters of athletes out there, and they're going to have some tough matchups. But I like what I see so far. But what do you think about the rotation so far?
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think everybody thinks that Hunter Dickinson should be starting at this point. I think he should be as well, too, though I don't think it's a huge deal if Austin Davis continues to, as long as Dickinson plays a lot more minutes than Davis. And he played 22 last night, Dickinson that is. But, man, if he's durable enough and can be playing a little more than that in the 25 to 30 range, I think you got to roll with him, because there were times where Davis struggled mightily defensively last night, and that's against Ball State. So it's a little concerning to think how he would fare against the likes of Iowa's Luka Garza and Illinois' Kofi Coburn in the Big Ten. So Dickinson is only going to get better and better, and it's exciting to watch. If Michigan beats UCF by a decent margin on Sunday and then also beats NC State on Wednesday, that would be a very, very good sign because these are going to be two quality opponents. UCF has only beaten one team this year, and that's Auburn. They're 1-0, and they beat them by 8. So this is a quality UCF team. Kevin Keats out in Raleigh seems to always have at least a decent North Carolina State team in recent years. So we're going to learn a lot about this Michigan team over these next 2 games heading into conference play. Again, if Michigan were to drop one of these next 2, it would not be the end of the world. It's early in the year. A non-conference loss to a decent opponent is not going to kill you on your resume come tournament time. But again, if Michigan goes 2-0 in these next 2, I think we can really start getting excited, and that's kind of when you can peg Michigan as an upper echelon Big Ten team, even though I definitely think they are as of now. But I think these next 2 games would further solidify that notion.
Yeah, it's always tough to tell what a basketball team is and what a college basketball team is when they play a few quote-unquote cupcakes early in the year. I know Bowling Green is, the MAC favorite, and, winning by 14, that's certainly a fine win in game 1. But the truth will be told out there on Sunday and Wednesday, like you mentioned, against a couple pretty darn good teams, and UCF getting off to a good start, beating Auburn. But those are important games. I agree that there's no, you want to split those at the very least, and then you move on to Big Ten play. But Michigan has a gauntlet in February and early March, and you want to get as many wins as possible in this weird year, especially like the games that are going to get played. If you can get these off early in the year, you want to win them because you have some tough ones coming down the stretch at the end of the year, and you never know. Let's say some of your easier Big Ten games in January, a couple of them get canceled, and then you end up playing the rest of them. You never know how this season's going to play out, so get as many wins as you possibly can, especially early here. But basically, my message there is just win games. So, not much analysis. But what's the number one concern for you with this team? Is it just maybe tightening the rotation up? Is it some of the things I mentioned with some of the perimeter D? The defense down low, they jump on too many pump fakes. That's another thing. I think they got to shore some things up defensively. But what's your concern?
Yeah, there's no glaring weakness or anything like that I would point to as of yet. The turnovers are another one you could point to. That was a big reason Oakland hung around on Sunday. I think Michigan finished with 20, if I'm not mistaken, and that's way too many. But defensively also, they have to tighten some things up. Ball State was getting to the rim way too easy at times last night. They were going in for layups at times, and that obviously just can't happen, especially when considering it is a lesser opponent like Ball State. But with that being said, Ball State still only shot 39% for the game last night, so that's obviously not a good percentage, and as a whole, Michigan did a solid job defensively, but it does take a year when Xavier Simpson and John Teskey both regressed defensively in a big way, and big men tore up Michigan for much of the first half last year. And that is kind of concerning because ever since Luke Yaklich left, Michigan's defense has not been the same. I know that's not saying much because he's probably one of the 2 or 3 or 4 best defensive assistant coaches in the entire country in all of college basketball. I think he proved that during his time in Ann Arbor. So Michigan's got to shore up the defense. Like I said, the turnovers as well. You have to cut down on those. 3-point shooting at times could be better, but again, that's streaky. And it is good that there are no glaring weaknesses or anything that we can specifically point to and say that this is really going to cost this team once Big Ten play hits.
Somebody on our message board last night after the game said the defense is very poorly coached and they're a far cry away from what they were under Luke Yaklich. I said, I disagree on the first part. I don't think they're very poorly coached, but I agree on the second part because Luke Yaklich is an incredible defensive coach, and I think he's going to be a really good head coach. Now the head coach at Illinois Chicago, and I think he's going to rise up the ranks. So like you said, it's not saying a whole lot that this team's a far cry away on defense, and it was under Yaklich. No team was really the way they were under Yaklich. Very few teams. I guess you could throw Texas Tech in that mix, but man, Luke Yaklich is a hell of a coach, and I think he's going to have a really good career as a head coach, and glad he got that opportunity this year in his first year at Illinois Chicago.
I would
go ahead.
add, I think your response was perfect, and whoever posted that on the message board has to keep things in perspective. It's all about perspective. Luke Yaklich, or what Michigan was under Yaklich defensively, was, again, one of the 2 or 3 best defensive teams in the country. You're right there with Texas Tech, and I think you could throw Virginia into the mix as well. The defense that Michigan was playing in 2018 and 2019 there was number 1 in the country for much of the year, according to Ken Pomeroy's rankings, which are viewed as arguably the most reliable in the entire country. So are they a far cry from what they were under Yaklich? Probably, but again, that's not saying much, and that certainly does not mean that they're poorly coached on defense this year.
Yeah, and they have strides to make, but they'll be able to have the opportunity to do that here going forward.
And again, this team has played 3 games, so there is a long way to go.
So true. The truth will be told Sunday, Wednesday, and as the season moves on just how good this Michigan basketball team is. Let's finish with our college football picks here. It's weird that we don't have a Michigan football game here with no bye weeks scheduled into this Big Ten season, but here we are. Michigan joins 9 teams now that have games that have been canceled, 9 Big Ten teams, that is. So let's pick some games, and we'll stick in the Big Ten to start with Ohio State, Michigan State. Ohio State canceled game last week. Michigan State coming off of a huge win over Northwestern, a top 10 win for Mel Tucker and the Spartans. But basically, I think Ohio State is going to be ready for this one. They're 23.5-point favorites in East Lansing, and I think they're going to roll Michigan State. I think last week for Michigan State, while it was an impressive win for them, was a little bit of fool's gold in terms of how good they are. They're nobody that Ohio State can't handle, and Ohio State's going to be fired up. They need to impress the committee here with the small amount of games they have. So I say they win this game by 24 or more.
I'm in a similar boat. I think that spread of 23.5 is pretty much spot on. I won't be surprised if MSU keeps it a little closer. Indiana displayed some of Ohio State's weaknesses when they threw for nearly 500 yards on them. But Ohio State's going to win this game, obviously. I think it'll be somewhere in the 38-17 range or something like that. MSU could hang around for a bit, but the outcome is not going to be in doubt. But, man, I hate it when these 2 teams play every year, and there is not enough money in the world that you could pay me to have me sit down and watch all 3 hours of this game.
Well, I agree. I'll probably watch some of it, but and you mentioned the weakness that Indiana showed and basically exposing Ohio State. You need a quarterback like Michael Penix to do that, and no offense to Rocky Lombardi, but he's no Michael Penix, and it sucks that Michael Penix is out. We'll pick that game in a second, Indiana, Wisconsin, but Michigan basically made Rocky Lombardi look like an elite quarterback, but that was Michigan's defense. So we'll see what happens in that one. Texas A&M, Auburn's the next one. I think Texas A&M's in a similar boat to Ohio State. They want to impress. They have to win. They have to win convincingly here. They're at number 5 in the country if they want to jump into that top 4. So give me Texas A&M to cover their 7 points as favorites in Auburn.
Yeah, this is kind of a tough one. I think that 7-point spread is pretty darn accurate. I think A&M will win a tight one, probably by 7 points or so, but I would not be surprised to see Auburn pull this one out. They were embarrassed last week at Alabama, so I know that Gus Malzahn isn't necessarily the best coach in the world, but we'll see how he gets his guys ready this week. A&M is fighting to get in that playoff, and they really underwhelmed in a lot of ways last week against a bad LSU team in College Station. So I think A&M pulls this one out, but I don't think they're one of the 4 or 5 best teams in the country, and I think they would get blown out if they were to potentially make the playoff.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a drop-off there between the top 2 teams, honestly, in Alabama and Clemson. But A&M's got a shot, and they have a lot to prove here going forward to finish off this season. Let's wrap it up with this game, 3:30 on ABC. Number 12, Indiana at number 16, Wisconsin. Wisconsin 14-point favorites. Looks like it'll be Jack Tuttle at quarterback, the Utah transfer. Obviously, Michael Penix out. And 14 points just seems like a lot for Wisconsin to me. And without Michael Penix, I'll take Indiana to cover 14.
So I think that Wisconsin gets it done by exactly 14 points or so, right in that range. It's going to be fairly tight throughout, but man, not having Michael Penix is just a season killer potentially for Indiana. They had extremely high hopes, and I think you can throw a lot of those out the window. Excuse me. Jack Tuttle was a 4-star and borderline top 100 recruit out of high school. He was rated as the number 104 overall player in the country nationally. So he has a lot of potential, but he's just never really played in college before, especially at Indiana. So I think there are going to be major growing pains. I still think this is a very good Wisconsin team, despite their ugly loss at Northwestern the other week. I can't pick Wisconsin to lose at home in Madison. So give me the Badgers by 14.
Yeah, the fans will all be jumping around there. You can't pick them to lose at home.
Yeah, all 15 workers or 20 workers or whoever's in attendance.
Yeah, maybe some parents, but man, yeah, I'll take Indiana. I still got a little confidence in them. We'll see what happens. Wisconsin hasn't played many games, but it will be interesting. We will know a lot more when we record this podcast next week. Will we be 2 days away from Michigan, Ohio State, or will we still be on a pause and talking about when Michigan can possibly return to the facilities? We will see. We will have that coverage at thewolverine.com. minute by minute, hour by hour. So check us out there and use promo code Nike75. You get a free $75 Nike gift card. That promotion ends Thursday, so make sure to do that right now. New members get free $75 gift card to Nike and 25% off their annual subscription. You can't beat that deal. But we will talk to everybody next week.